Environment, Climate, and Legacy to order. Let records show that today is Thursday, March 13th. The time is 3:05. We have a full agenda today. Full agenda meaning we might use up to 2 hours that we allot for this committee. We had 3 bills and an informational hearing or a presentation, starting with Senator Hauschild on the impact of federal action on United States Forest Service and National Park Service. So looks like Senator Hauschild is already in gear at his place and ready to go. So Senator Hauschild, you may begin on your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. You've often heard me talk about my district and how special of a place it is. I have the opportunity to represent some of our greatest treasures, I think, in our country, but especially in our state, whether that's Superior National Forest, Voyageurs National Park, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, the North Shore, and many, many other state parks. And in that, we owe it to our state and our country to make sure that we are being good stewards of those public lands. And a major component of that is the work that our federal partners at the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service do. And I will tell you that since recent decisions have been made at the federal level to do across the board, haphazard, in my opinion, Mr. Chair, firings of these critical workers that help us with managing our state forests and our national parks, I have heard countless stories and had countless amounts of outreach from constituents, from local mayors, city councilors, county commissioners about the impact that this will have on our region in northern Minnesota, throughout Minnesota, and across our country. And Mr. Chair, I think the important thing to note is that in addition to these folks being people that are raising their families, living and working and playing in our communities, many of these folks are doing the critical work to help protect our communities from things like wildfires. They're the folks that are making sure that our environment is stewarded, that we are protecting our outdoor heritage that is so important to us here in northern Minnesota. So when the recent decision was made to do these firings and to force early retirements of many of our federal workforce that are important to our outdoors, I wrote a letter to the President and to Congressman Stauber outlining how detrimental this would be for our state and for northern Minnesota. I sent that letter on February 20th of 2025. I have yet to receive a response from Congressman Stauber or President Trump regarding this issue. However, we continue to see stories from individuals who are impacted by these decisions. Recently, one of our U.S. senators invited one of the impacted folks from these firings to the State of the Union to highlight how important this issue is. So, Mr. Chair, I thought it was important that we have a hearing today, and I am really grateful that you agreed to take the opportunity to highlight how devastating this decision is. And we do have 2 constituents of mine, Ms. Severson and Ms. Loeffler, that are willing to testify on the detriments of these decisions. And I believe, Mr. Chair, we will also hear from the DNR about the partnerships that they have with the Forest Service, with the National Park Service, and other federal entities on protecting our outdoor heritage. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I don't have anything else to add, but I'd love to hear the testimony and continue with this informational hearing, and I'm here for questions and discussion as well.
Okay, thank you. We do have 2 testifiers online. So if they're ready, you may turn on your camera and unmute yourself as well. Welcome, and state your name for the record.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Kate Severson. I don't know if you want me to speak first, or joining us today is also Jess Loeffler.
You may go ahead, Ms. Severson.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. I was the former Chief of Interpretation and Education at Voyageurs National Park. On February 14th, after 7 months of working for the park, I was fired by the current administration because I was in my first year of service and still on my probationary period. However, before this, I have over a decade of experience working in state parks in Texas and working on Pikes Peak as a park ranger. In those positions, I was on the front lines. I provided guided ranger hikes. I did dark sky telescope viewing programs. I collected park fees, and I trained seasonal staff and volunteers. Back in July, I was excited to come home to Minnesota. I'm originally from Rochester, Minnesota, and graduated from college at Gustavus Adolphus. And I was honored to join the National Park Service. I realized that today I was invited to speak to talk about the impact of the loss of my job and how, if I am not reinstated, I will be leaving International Falls, Minnesota, which is where Voyageurs National Park is. But I think anyone who has lost a job or has had family or friends lose a job knows how emotionally devastating it can be. You begin to question your worth, and there's a lot of stress going into figuring out next steps and what you're going to do to make ends meet. But I apologize. What I really want to talk about today are the national park sites in Minnesota and what they provide Minnesotans. I think the system, the National Park Service system, is under attack by the current administration, and I'd like to make it clear that they provide a lot, both economically and for environmental protections and in environmental education across the state. So Minnesota has 5 National Park Service sites and 1 national park, so a total of 6. When we talk about the economy, there are annual reports that show how much visitors spend in the surrounding communities. At Voyageurs National Park, the 2023 report showed that $20.4 million was spent by visitors. And this isn't in a big city. These are like rural communities. And that's how much money went into people coming to see the park, people coming to visit, and they paid for lodging, they paid for dining, and other things in this area. So it's a huge economic boost. Other sites in Minnesota that are getting this are Grand Portage National Monument, Pipestone National Monument. Jess will talk about Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, which is in the Twin Cities, and the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, which we share with Wisconsin. So I know a lot of what the new administration is doing is saying, oh, this is making things more efficient, this is better for the taxpayers, for the economy, and you look at the numbers and it's just not true. The other huge part of my job as Chief of Interpretation and Education was providing environmental education programs. Here in this area, Voyager provides field trips for grades K through 12 in the spring, fall, and winter. The programs cover things like the history of the fur trade. We talk about bald eagle habitats and how the park monitors their population. We provide recreation education, outdoor recreation education, such as junior angler classes, snowshoeing, and just a wide assortment of things for kids. And over the past couple of years, the park even began live streaming some lessons. This past fall, we reached 43,000 students to teach them about the fish surveys and the fish studies that are happening at Voyageurs. And I will say, the Voyageurs Conservancy, which is our official philanthropic partner, organizes and leads most of these educational programs. In my role, I did facilitate them and, made sure they were high quality. However, we rely too much on partners like this. The park should be pulling more of its weight in providing these. And so park staff provide a lot. I know I focus more on the education side of things, but there's the protection of our resources and there's the protection of our visitors that are also very important. And in the short time I worked with the National Park System, and I think a lot of us are aware of this, they're underfunded and understaffed. And they are constantly trying to do more with less, and it's reaching a breaking point. They can't keep being asked to do more and more and more, while this administration is cutting people like myself and is planning on cutting more positions at the park as well. They're just putting a lot of our critical services at risk. So anyways, thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. I'll pass it over to Jess so she can explain her position.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson, for your testimony. We'll go to the next testifier. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Jessica Loeffler. I was a biological science technician with the National Park Service at Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, or since that's quite a mouthful, I'll just abbreviate it to MNRA from now on. Thank you so much for allowing me to join and speak with you today. I wanted to share a little bit about my personal journey and highlight how the loss of a single employee can significantly impact the environment. A little bit about my background. I earned a bachelor's degree in Minnesota and my master's in environment and conservation science in North Dakota. I served for 2 years in AmeriCorps and worked in many different natural resource positions over the years. It took 10 years of professional experience and training until I landed my first permanent job with MNRA. After earning many performance awards for going above and beyond, my achievements in just 2 years of employment there led me to earn a promotion, not just a promotion, but my dream job I had been working a decade to obtain. And like hundreds of other federal employees, we were promoted only to receive an email stating that we were being terminated due to poor performance. Our leadership team was very confused as I had stellar performance reviews. We lost 1/4 of our natural resource department that day. We had one natural resource manager, one specialist to steward all of the land at MNRA, one native mussel and aquatic invasive species specialist to restore river diversity to improve water quality and positively impacts fishing in Minnesota, and then one wildlife biologist in my position. So I just wanted to take a moment to list a few of my duties that will not be accomplished due to my termination. So my role wasn't just about collecting data, it was also about ensuring the safety and survival of many species. I was establishing a nationwide management plan for beavers and aquatic ecosystems. I coordinated and expanded our monarch monitoring program throughout the Twin Cities, tracking a species that has lost 80% of its population in the last 20 years. I was creating a heron rookery monitoring program to help oversee some of the hundreds of colonial nesting migratory birds, which 2 of these rookeries have been abandoned in the last few years. I was responsible for obtaining necessary permits and coordinating and executing fieldwork for state endangered amphibians, such as the cricket frog, breeding songbirds, monitoring bald eagle nest populations and juvenile survival rates, conducting data analysis on different projects to assess population trends and fluctuations. And losing this data is like asking a doctor to save a patient without any symptoms or diagnosis. So without it, conservation efforts are crippled and species face irreversible decline or extinction. And once a species is gone, it's gone forever. I also was coordinating a large-scale BioBlitz at Minnewassee, a site of deep cultural significance to tribal communities. This event involved 30 to 40 partnering agencies working together to document every single species of flora and fauna, quantifying nearly 15 years of restoration efforts while also engaging students and publics in citizen science. Beyond wildlife, I also led habitat restoration events with volunteers, engaging hundreds of community members in preserving and enhancing Minnesota's last 1% of native prairie. I also helped remove trees that were hazardous for pedestrians, worked at the visitor center to engage youth, led interpretive programs to hundreds of attendees, taught youth and adults how to kayak, assisted in natural resource members on their projects, and worked in wildland fire management, which would have allowed me to fight fires nationwide, such as the California fires we saw a few months ago. With my termination, all of these vital conservation efforts have been halted, leaving a fragile ecosystem vulnerable and unprotected. As of right now, there's 0 representation for terrestrial wildlife at our local national park. I'd also like to highlight that I was the lowest paid position on our team, and part of my position was to prepare grant applications to even fund my own position and wages. I was also a career seasonal, and although there's a new order to allow for some outside seasonals to be hired for summer work, I am not one of those individuals because I was internal. So overall, I spent a decade training, earning promotions, dedicating my life to protect wildlife as a public servant, only to have it taken away. A career I spent a decade building is now gone, and I'm not alone, as hundreds of other conservation professionals in the country are facing the same thing. But this isn't just about my job. Species critical to Minnesota and to the entire United States are left unprotected. It's about the survival of species, the future of ecosystems, and the choices we make now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lofer and Ms. Stevenson, for your testimony. It's very compelling, and I did pick up at early on, Ms. Stevenson, you apologized. You referred to apologize of the situation that you're in, being straightforward, and no need to apologize. Apology should be from our part here. We're sorry that you're in the situation you are now, but tomorrow is not the end, and so we'll continue to hear you and work on your behalf. You have a leader here that, Senator Hauschild, that, are standing behind you, and we'll look forward to more progress ahead of us. Next is testimony from the DNR. If Ms. Thielen can come over.
Senator?
Yes, Senator Kunish.
Would it work if we ask them some questions right now
Yes, we can.
before DNR?
Let's do that.
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
Senator Kunish, you have the committee. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry, Kate and Jessica, that the rug was basically just pulled out from underneath you, both of you, when you're doing such vital work, and, just sort of starting out in positions that are going to have really important consequences to the environment and to Minnesota, to our parks and our environment in so many ways. And I have 3 questions that I'd maybe like each of you to answer. You both have very unique positions, not just here in Minnesota, but across the country. Are you hearing that other folks in your role in other states are being, just let go overnight the way that you were? That's the first question. The second one is, what do job opportunities look like for you in the future? And then in the near future, because I'm sure you can't, if you don't have a salary, what are you going to do? And Kate, I remember you saying you just moved back to Minnesota. So, and then the third thing is, are you all receiving unemployment? So these thousands and thousands, maybe even millions of people who have been, just randomly and unnecessarily and for no reason fired from their jobs, nilly-willy, are all of these people, do you think, going to end up on unemployment?
Ms. Stevenson or Ms. Lofer, anyone?
Thank you. To answer your first question about other firings, so the majority of the National Park Service employees were fired on February 14th. That was when our agency was targeted, and the people who were targeted were first-year federal employees or second year, still in our probationary period. And a lot of the media is getting the word probationary incorrect, thinking that it was because of performance that we're in a probationary period, and it just meant we were new. And so that's who they targeted first. And it sounds like the courts, even as of today, were considering whether this practice was the government trying to do a reduction in force through improper means. So there is a chance that we would be reinstated. Still kind of up in the air, as the way a lot of the U.S. Forest Service employees recently were supposed to be reinstated. However, this government is still planning to do reduction in force, which is what I was trying to attest to today. Is every single person at our park right now is being asked to do like 5 to 6 different jobs, and losing anybody is just, it's kind of inconceivable. And then the second question about, I remember the third question.
The second one was, what are your job opportunities if you were to look for another job?
So the job market right now, especially in this career, it's always been very, very competitive. These jobs are fairly rare, so I have already started applying for other work. International Falls is a population of around 6,000. I don't have much hope that I'll be able to find a job here. I'm hoping Minnesota at the very least, but there's also in this field, we're used to moving around a lot to find jobs. So I'm assuming that's what I'll need to do if I'm not reinstated, or if I eventually do get fired through a proper reduction in force. And then last one, I did apply for unemployment. I'm hoping, and I just got a payment this week. It is something I'm hoping I'll be able to pay back, because I'm, again, hoping I'll be reinstated and not have to draw from unemployment. Or I'll find a job soon and not have to draw from it for very long.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Loper, anything to add?
Yeah, so for question number one, Kate did a great job of explaining how the National Park Service, we kind of hit that first round of terminations. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing a lot of other agencies, land management agencies joining us. I think the most recent one was NOAA. And so even though we have kind of passed that first one, there are other probationary employees that I still work with, I used to work with, sorry, and they're scared to go to work every day because they're worried that their job could be taken away as well in just one day, overnight. They could show up and be told to pack their bags and leave. As far as job opportunities in the near future, I have been applying. I'm currently located in the Twin Cities, and there's not a whole lot of jobs even here. So I've been applying, and places have been very candid with me, saying that they're getting hundreds of federal employees applications. And so even though I have 10 years of experience, I'm also competing with 10,000 plus other federal employees that were terminated. And number three, I did sign up to apply for unemployment, and I haven't checked the balance since of Monday, but I applied starting that first week after I was terminated. So yes, I'll be depending on state unemployment to keep me through for the next couple weeks.
Thank you for both your answer. Any follow-up?
I'm just very, very, very sorry that this happened to you and all the maybe hundreds of thousands of federal workers that are out there. My sister lost her job with the federal government, so I kind of understand what you are all going through. I mean, at best, I hope that you are all reinstated and you're able to continue to do the good work you're doing in Minnesota. And if not, it looks like Minnesota will be supporting you all for a while. And I'm going to just say I'm happy to do that under the circumstances, but let's hope that you find a really good opportunity should you not be able to get back to the federal government. Thank you.
Senator Hauschild.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Senator Kunish, for your questions. It did make me think about something that I am working on, and it's a little bit related to this, but I just kind of want to make the point. For Kate and Jessica, they had a firing that occurred, right, and they were able to apply for unemployment. However, I have heard from several federal employees in my district, and maybe others have as well, where they are feeling the pressure to resign early or to take a buyout to leave, even though they're not even close to retirement. And I have had those constituents reach out to me about unemployment under those circumstances because they technically aren't fired, but they're being coerced into early retirement under the fear that if they don't take the early retirement, they will be fired anyway. So it's this coercion tactic that's being used against them. And I do have a bill that I am currently having drafted. It's completed and I'm having it drafted where those employees could potentially benefit from Minnesota unemployment. So I will share that with folks that are interested. But I just want to make that point on that unemployment piece.
Thank you. Any other comments or any questions to our guests or testifiers before we go to DNR? Okay, to our Department of Natural Resource, Ms. Tillen, Director Tillen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Patty Thielen. I am the Forestry Division Director for the Department of Natural Resources. I was asked to talk a little bit about federal funding and how it relates to wildfire suppression in Minnesota. Minnesota's Department of Natural Resources coordinates and collaborates with federal partners on wildfire suppression planning and response, including the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But DNR's wildfire response is not contingent on federal partners' availability for wildfire planning and response. Participation, coordination, and mutual aid support with the federal agencies improves effectiveness and efficiency of the mutual aid and overall response capabilities for the state. Currently, we anticipate that wildfire suppression needs can be met with existing agreements and partnerships and operating plans. We recently received confirmation that existing Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or also known as Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, fire grants were approved and should proceed with full implementation of these awards. This includes grants to local volunteer fire departments, grants to boost state fire capacity, and grants to support efforts for wildfire mitigation and prevention across the state. And it also includes a community wildfire defense grant for St. Louis County to assist in implementing their community wildfire protection plan to treat areas around Ely and Vermilion by reducing fuels available for wildfire that were affected by the spruce budworm-killed trees. We do know that staff from both our national forests as well as several other federal agencies, as the earlier testifiers mentioned, were let go recently. Many of them have wildfire suppression as a part of their job responsibilities. It might not be their main responsibility, but they participate as needed. We don't know the magnitude of those reductions. We have proactively reached out to recently separated federal employees that we know of, folks that our staff are acquainted with, to make sure that they know about seasonal firefighter positions that we are posting and hiring for right now. And this may help us ensure that key skill sets in wildfire suppression are available to fill critical fire suppression needs. The Department of Natural Resources maintains partnerships with several of our neighbors through the Great Lakes Forest Fire Compact. We sometimes call that acronym GLFC. That compact includes Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ontario, and Manitoba, where we share and exchange wildfire resources for personnel, for engines, for aviation and other equipment assets that we need to meet our needs across the Great Lakes area. Aside from the Great Lakes Forest Fire Compact, DNR also maintains resource agreements with 3 other states, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Oregon, for wildfire reciprocity support to meet surge and long-term wildfire needs. And we are working to secure additional state-to-state agreements. We'll be assessing wildfire conditions and resources and regularly coordinating across agencies to ensure adequate staffing and resources are available in Minnesota, particularly during the time that we have the most fires in Minnesota. That's from when the snow melts until things start to green up. At DNR, we will continue to prepare for and respond to wildfire in Minnesota to the best of our capabilities. We'll work with all of our partners to provide additional support when we can, should there be reduced federal capacity. The Department of Natural Resources participates in weekly coordination calls to check in across all firefighting agencies in Minnesota that engage in fire suppression. These calls allow us to coordinate on fire conditions, on resources, and on needs. So far this year, we've had full engagement from federal agencies that participate in wildfire suppression for the wildfire preparedness in the state of Minnesota.
Thank you very much, Director, for your presentation and testimony. Any questions to Director? Sarah Kunish.
You spoke a lot about fires and now the depletion of support staff to address should there be some major forest fires. Given the drought or the low amount of moisture that we've received this winter, what would you say the chances are come this spring? You were saying from when the snow melts until a certain point is kind of a high-risk area. Like, what kind of risk are we in here in Minnesota? And I don't even know if you have staff to do this, but what kind of preventative measures could Minnesota put out there other than, you know, on the news or on the radio or, you know, getting Smokey the Bear signs up to high, you know, like what is the risk realistically right now?
Director Teeler.
Mr. Chair, members, the risk is really changing constantly throughout the spring. It rains and things slow down for a few days, then it dries out again. And so it's hard to pinpoint what the risk is for the whole spring right now. We'll be monitoring it closely. We have staff that do that as a full-time job this time of year, and we will be communicating through news releases, through social media, getting information out about the local fire danger as it varies from one part of the state to another, as well as we always do.
Sarah Kunish.
And I guess my next question is, are there enough employees out there to monitor the vast, you know, terrain for these fires, or will it be much more limited as far as being, you know, watching for it and understanding? And then is there adequate fire response, especially in these communities in rural Minnesota where they have maybe small fire trucks, departments, or, you know, have to use their neighbors' fire services? I mean, is any of that taken into consideration right now?
Director Thielen.
Mr. Chair, members, yes, we do have staff that are monitoring. We use aerial detection actually when it starts to get drier out, and we have planes that are looking for smoke where it shouldn't be. We also luckily get a number of calls just from the public reporting fires. We're able to look into them and see if that's a fire that is permitted or if it's something that we need to address. Within the state, we work across agencies and move our resources where we need them within DNR, across the different agencies that participate in wildfire. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also able to move resources from other states into Minnesota to help us out as needed. That costs more than using our staff that already work here.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick follow-up for Ms. Thielen. Are local fire departments able to fight fires in the boundary waters, or does their jurisdiction expand to the boundary waters?
Director Thielen.
Mr. Chair, members, the Department of Natural Resources and the Forest Service have defined protection areas where each of us is the lead agency responsible. I believe for most or all of the boundary waters, that's Federal Forest Service jurisdiction. We do work with local fire departments on urban interface fires across the state, and we have working agreements with many volunteer fire departments in rural areas so that when we need to work together, we've got an agreement for how we do business.
Thank you. Senator Herr, I have a few other questions.
Yeah, follow up.
So thank you, Ms. Saling and Ms. Loeffler. I know they're probably off, but they mentioned that they were, at least one of them was laid off on Valentine's Day. That was a bad day for federal workers in your area. The federal government laid off 370 U.S. Fish and Wildlife workers, 388 EPA workers, 1,200 Natural Resource Conservation Service workers. Today, the government is planning on laying off up to 65% of its EPA workers. And I think I mentioned U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I just want to emphasize, and I'm sorry, Senator McEwen and Senator Hauschild, but I need you to know that sea lampreys are on the rise in the Great Lakes. So, lucky you, I just sent you a picture of one. I'm sure my colleagues know what a sea lamprey is, and it's no joke. I Googled who manages sea lampreys in the Great Lakes, and the answer is the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. And who funds the Great Lakes Fishery Commission? All of the organizations that I just mentioned, who not only have had large numbers of staff laid off, but who also participate in the management of our Great Lakes. Now, straight from the website, it says that sea lampreys are very resilient. They are, when control is relaxed for even a short time, they bounce back with a vengeance and inflict major harm, not only to my leg, if one attaches to me, which I hope never happens, but to fish. I mean, it's a big economic impact on the $7 billion fish industry out of the Great Lakes. My point is that I can't believe I even have to say it out loud, but there are some things that must be managed by the federal government. Lakes and bodies of waters that border 8 states and 2 countries are a great example of where the federal government must take control. And this is just one of my nightmares. I mean, sea lampreys, come on. But I mean, other things of great concern to me are what might happen as our federal government continues to be decimated. So Senator Hauschild, I appreciate your concern about forestry and the boundary waters, and I'm very concerned about our water quality, about our those of our federal employees that monitor pollutants, not just in the metro area, but frankly, most often in rural areas. Those are the people that are going to be impacted by the lack of federal oversight. As I said, hundreds of employees were laid off on February 14th from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the National Park Service, U.S. EPA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and I'm nervous. I'm really nervous. My heart's broken for these federal employees who aren't working for huge salaries. They're working because they're passionate and they're concerned for the environment. Hunters and fishermen are the ones that are, and campers, outdoor enthusiasts, just from this content are the ones that are going to suffer. And as we see the federal government decimated even more, we are going to see farmers, we're going to see babies, we're going to see students, teachers. Senator Kunish, I'm sure you have a lot to say about the 1,000 Department of Education employees that were laid off yesterday. This is a real thing. And I appreciate your feedback. If you want to comment on sea lampreys, I'd love it. But it's a terrifying thing. It is terrifying to think of what's happening to our country, what's happening to our environment, our forests, our parks, our water, our economy, and it's not a joke. I sit next to plenty of colleagues in these committees who try to minimize this. It is not a joke, it's a real thing. We have we have thousands of employees that have already been kicked out in the name of efficiency, and I'm appalled. So if you have any comment on that, both Senator Hauschild or Ms. Thielen, I would welcome them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any Senator Hauschild?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your passion, Senator Johnson Stewart, and your outrage on this issue. I mean, I think one thing that destroys me so much about what is happening is you hear all of this talk at the federal level from Doge and Elon Musk and President Trump about waste, about bloat, about laziness, about DEI hires in our federal government. The folks that we just heard from, that's the ultimate meritocracy. These are people with dedication, with experience that they laid out for over a decade, trying to get to the positions to make a difference in our environment and our outdoors, helping children get to experience the incredible opportunities that we have in Minnesota. And we are making decisions not based on merit. We're making decisions that are haphazard and destroying people's lives, and in effect, to Senator Johnson Stewart's point and Senator Kunish's point, that are going to have detrimental impacts on our environment. But the worst part about it is that we're making these cuts, we know from the budget that was passed at the federal level, in order to provide trillions of dollars in tax cuts for the wealthy. So not only are we making the haphazard decision to destroy people's lives who have used merit to get to where they are, to protect our outdoors and provide opportunities for our people, we're laying them off, destroying their lives, providing tax cuts to the wealthiest, using the money that is potentially saved, although it's not going to make up the difference even close. And then we're passing that burden onto the state, and we heard from the DNR expert that it's going to then get passed to my rural communities to pick up the slack. So my local fire departments, my local communities, I'm hearing from my mayors that are afraid of what this means for the services that they have to provide. We recently had the Soil and Water Conservation District members here. I'm sure many of you met with them. They're talking about all the slack that they have to pick up. This is what happens when we make these haphazard decisions that are not based on merit. They're based on a political outcome that they're looking for in order to provide benefits for the wealthiest in our country. And they're just compounding the problems that are going to cost us more because of wildfires, that are going to cost us more because of the impact on our sea wildlife and our industries that use these outdoors, the recreation and tourism opportunities that we have in northern Minnesota. The compounding costs are going to far outweigh the short-term benefits of cutting these people out in order to provide tax cuts. It's an outrage, and Mr. Chair, I know we have a lot to get to, but I just want to say that that I have heard from countless constituents. I appreciate that these folks are willing to testify, because I will tell you, Mr. Chair, that there are a lot of folks that work for the Forest Service right now who are being coerced into early retirement that are unable to testify. I talked to tens of them in my district who are unwilling to testify today because they're afraid that they're going to get the notice that they're fired the next day. So what's happening is it's incomprehensible. I'm going to go up to Koochichain County on Sunday. I'm going to do a town hall near Voyageurs National Park and hear from folks directly on this issue. But Mr. Chair, I appreciate that we're drawing attention to this issue. It's an outrage, and we got to do everything we can at the state level to make sure these people's voices are heard.
Thank you, Senator Hauschild, for your leadership and also expressing in great emotion. And it must be painful to you as well to see what your community is going through. Senator Green, I see you raise a hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to bring a little bit of reality back here. Nobody likes to see people laid off, all right? But here's from a story from September 1st of 2024. long before the Trump administration took office or was even elected. And it says, it's worse than most realize. Since I reported on the Forest Service audit that found a $750 million hole in their budget 2 weeks ago, regional foresters have started to send out all employee memos saying they need to start cutting positions. Now, I know that, we went through our own $18 billion surplus here, and now we're looking at $6 billion deficit. And at some point, you have to say, where is this money coming from? And when you got a $750 million hole, and before the people that you're beating up on now said we need to fix this, the Forest Service itself said we need to fix some stuff. Are you familiar with this story, Senator Hauschild?
Excuse me, Senator Green, if you could name your source, that would be helpful to us.
Senator Green, your source.
From this particular website, it was put out by the Hotspot Wake Up, and it's actually a memo that they had from the U.S. Forest Service. So it shouldn't be too hard to find. I shouldn't say that because I had to look for it a long time. I read this story not in this paper before, but when you go online now, there's so many different websites that have put up stuff, it's hard to find the stories, but they are there. So were you familiar with the $750 million hole in the U.S. Forest Service, Senator Hauschild?
Senator Hauschild.
Mr. Chair, Senator Green, I'm not familiar with the story from the hotspot whatever it was, but I do know that the DOJ committee or whatever the organization is that they have created has explicitly said that this is part of their plan to cut these positions, and that these notices went out as recently as February, which is not September, and we know that in February this decision was explicitly made by the administration and by the federal government, and it was explicitly stated as part of their plan to cut the federal waste, abuse, bloat, all of those types of phrases that they use as part of the DOJ efforts at the federal level.
Senator Weisenberg, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If Patty could come back up, please.
Senator Weisenberg, you can go ahead with the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question to the DNR is also pertaining to what Senator Green just talked about, and the story's from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I've got it pulled up on like 5 different engines on my computer if you'd like to come and look at it. And I'm very able to read. So how long ago did the DNR start working on their plan for the upcoming 2025 season to decide how we were going to manage forests? You talked about working with Forest Service and things. So I'm assuming you knew about this and you contacted the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So you're probably talking about this in the last year as well, moving forward in the next year.
Director Thielen.
Mr. Chair, members, I'm not clear exactly what the question is. Apologies.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Were you aware that the U.S. Fish and or the Forest Service was speaking last fall already in September, and it looks like even the bill was passed in July that they were going to be cutting many employees? Were you aware that the Forest Service was going to be cutting employees last year? That's what the U.S. Forest Service is saying, that they were going to cut employees. Were you aware of that?
Director Thielen.
Mr. Chair, members, I was not aware prior to 2025 that they intended to cut employees, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I guess we need to work on talking to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the Forest Service in Minnesota. There was lots of emotion in what was being said, and as someone who enjoys being outside myself, I'm not getting all emotional about losing my hunting and fishing in my land and things are going to happen. If people didn't exist, the woods would be just fine. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm happy these people are losing their jobs, but these things, the woods is the trees are always going to be there, and sea lampreys don't attach to people, which is something we can't just be saying. That's just ridiculous. And the fishing industry is going to be okay. You know, and if we're going to go talk about, you know, people losing their jobs, I mean, I could talk about my experience with the DNR. I'm not going to get into that. I could talk about, you know, my wife losing her job during COVID because she stood up for science and people's rights, and the shit I've went through for the last 4 years, and I'm not going to go into that. I didn't have anybody apologize to me for fighting for people. So what about all the trillions of dollars we spent around the world and we didn't take care of our own homeland? And now we're crying because we don't have money to keep people's jobs. Maybe we should stop taxing people and sending it everywhere. So Minnesota's going to be okay. The trees are going to be okay. We do have people that are going to continue to look out for our wildlife. It'll be okay. We'll get there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other comment? Or Senator Johnson Stewart?
Thank you, Senator Hurd. Okay, in my defense, they don't like to suck on people, but they are capable of it. So it's not ridiculous.
Thank you very much. Before I pass on to Senator Hauschild, I just, since Director Thielen's back on the...
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to apologize. I swore and I shouldn't have said that. So it just came out. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. Back to my thought. Director Thielen talked in great length about the fire, possible fire, and that. And I think that DNR had guarded that year to year to make sure that we don't have to deal with large fire or wildfire. And I recall back in the late 90s when Minnesota was hit with wildfire, it's out of control, and I wonder how much that will cost us then to our state and also to our federal government. So we don't need to get the number now, unless you know the number, Director, but I'm pretty sure it costs $1 million, millions and millions of dollars. May come close to even affecting the economy. That want to testify, talk about bringing the northern Minnesota brought in over 20 million of dollars of tourism to that part of the state. I just want to make that part as reference to Director Thielen talking about wildfire. So I'm going to pass to Senator Hauschild and the closing remark, and then we'll move on to our next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to note that we're talking about people's lives, that these are people who have been committed to a career of public service for our natural environment and for our forests and our parks for many decades, who have tried to get to a place where they could help our communities and help our region. And when you serve in a legislative position and you hear an outcry from constituents in a rush of frenzy about the impacts that are happening in their personal lives, not just the ones directly impacted, but from local elected officials, other families, people that know these individuals who are impacted, that's something you have a duty to respond to. And I think it's important to note, we talk a lot about our culture and our history in Minnesota, but it's important to note that in northern Minnesota, our national forests, our national parks, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, the North Shore, these are parts of our identity in northern Minnesota. And so when you talk about cutting the very people that care for those places, when you cut people out of our communities, that isn't just an attack on people's economic well-being, it's an attack on our culture and our heritage. And that needs to be called out. And so I'm still waiting for a response from the federal administration. I'm still waiting for a response from Congressman Stauber. I'm hoping that we can make sure that these folks get reinstated into their positions so that we can fight wildfires, protect our national environment, and do all the things that we need to do. But I'm afraid that it's going to fall on us in Minnesota. And so I'm grateful that we do have the folks here in the state of Minnesota that are willing to take on a lot of the challenges that we will face due to these cuts that I don't for a second consider waste or bloat or abuse. I consider this some of the most fundamental merit-based services that our public entities provide us for our environment in northern Minnesota, and we need to protect those. So we'll be doing everything we can to call this out and continuing to beat the drum on the issue. But Mr. Chair, I just appreciate you taking the valuable time that we have in committee to highlight the impact that this will have, and I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Hauschild, and thank you for your leadership, and we'll hear more as time progresses on the outcome of this that you take the lead on. So next on our agenda is Senator Johnson Stewart's bill, Senate File 1751.
Thank you, Senator Herr. I have some testifiers if they want to come up.
Do come up, and it appears that you have an author amendment, A4 amendment.
Yes, sir. I offer the A4 amendment that you should have in your notes already.
Everybody has the A4 amendment. And just for the record, we do have form. We have form right at the get-go of this committee. Senator, okay. Senator Johnson Stewart moved that the A4 amendment to be amended to Senate File 1750. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion prevail. Okay, Senator Johnson Stewart, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Senator Herr. I don't know if you're allowed to have visual aids in committee, but this box right here is 1 cubic foot. And today I'm talking about aggregate and the desperate need, and I'm not overstating it. We have a desperate need to preserve, identify, and find aggregate in Minnesota. So the word aggregate is used to describe loose rock. It can range anything from very, very silty sand to, of course, crushed gravel or large chunks of aggregate. We use aggregate in so many parts of our lives. And I brought the box up to just keep in mind this is 1 cubic foot. Now, the reason that this bill is being introduced today is in 2018, the OLA was asked to conduct a study on the availability of aggregates in Minnesota. Nothing really happened out of that. The study happened, the recommendations were presented, and in 2025 we have a evaluation report on the status. The status of the outcomes of that study. This bill implements those recommendations. I just want to say briefly, we really do have an aggregate shortage. In the construction industry, we've known about this for years. We've known about this for decades. If you think about a road, there's 3 components of the road there's lots of components of the road that contain aggregate, but most of our roads actually are built on a very deep base of aggregate. This is a cubic foot. We pay for aggregate by the cubic yard. That means we have 27 of these in order to make 1 cubic yard. We also could be paying for aggregate that makes up 80% of our typical concrete mixture. When we buy concrete, when you see a dump truck a concrete truck on the road, that usually has about 10 yards of 10 yards of concrete in it, meaning that we have about 200 of these boxes just to make 1 truckload of concrete. Likewise with blacktop, and I have someone from the Minnesota Asphalt Pavers Association here, a load of blacktop takes about 240 of these boxes. We need to know where our aggregate is, and we're lucky in the metropolitan area that we have been able to map our aggregate sources using GIS. But even so, we have problems with developers and builders building on top of our aggregate sources, so they become unavailable to us. Some of you have maybe driven north on where 694 and 494 come together in Maple Grove. There, the city of Maple Grove was able to identify where their aggregate resources were. They mined them, and now they're building a huge commercial area there after the aggregate has been removed. The counties, though, outside the 7-county metro area, do not have the resources to map their aggregate, which again is a big deal because it should be helpful in their planning and in their development decisions. So this bill does several things. It provides money for mapping, mostly to outstate counties. The 80 counties that are not part of the 7-county metropolitan area, it provides a small amount of money to update the aggregate mapping in the metropolitan area. And then it also provides some insight and work around the aggregate production tax.
Okay, thank you, Senator Johnson Stewart. To the testifier, please state your name for the record, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Darren Lee with Flaherty and Hood here today on behalf of the Aggregate and Ready Mix Association. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the status of construction aggregate materials. I'd like to thank Senator Johnson Stewart for bringing this bill forward, and along with her staff and your staff, Mr. Chair, and others that contributed to this bill, including the Association of Minnesota Counties. For those of you that may not be aware, we're facing a critical issue that could drastically inhibit our ability to address climate change, provide for affordable housing, and maintain adequate infrastructure. About 2/3 of every cubic yard of concrete and about 90% of every ton of asphalt is comprised of aggregate resources. The further aggregates need to be trucked, the more expensive these products become and the more CO2 is emitted. Accessing sources of aggregates as close to their end use is essential to our ability to keep costs down and minimize emissions. Transport is a major component of both cost and emissions associated with production of construction aggregates. Although emissions are relatively low for extracting the materials, transport of such heavy and bulky materials contributes more than might be the case for other materials when transported. Therefore, it's in the best interest of every community to have local access to construction aggregates. The Office of the Legislative Auditor, which Senator Johnson Stewart referenced, completed their report in January, which you had a hearing on, and that highlighted the historical efforts on this issue and lack of resources to address it. And so this bill is a major step forward by addressing the issue by implementing those recommendations from 2018. And this includes provision of funding for 2 years of the DNR aggregate mapping program. It also allows for the update of the Minnesota Geological Survey's year 2000 inventory of the metro area. In 2000, the Minnesota Geological Survey inventory concluded that we would be out of construction aggregates, or they were expected to be exhausted by the year 2029. So it's important that we get that inventory updated so we know where those aggregates are located so that we can make those best land use decisions. And so that's why we're supporting this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a couple of other interesting facts on aggregates. 400 tons of aggregates to build the average home. 8 tons per person in Minnesota per year of aggregate is needed, and 60,000 tons of rock, sand, and gravel is produced in Minnesota each year. So, thank you.
Good to have that quantification there. Next is Director of Minnesota Asphalt Pavement. Welcome. State your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Chair Herr and Committee. My name is Abby Bryduck. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Asphalt Pavement Association. We're a trade association that represents asphalt producers and pavers since 1942. With all that's going on these days, I feel bad that we have to alert you of this hidden crisis that you maybe weren't available of, but the situation really is dire, and there's something that we can do about it. We strongly support this bill. It recognizes the critical role of our aggregate resources, which, as mentioned, is essential for producing asphalt and maintaining our roads. We appreciate being named as participants in the DNR stakeholder group. Aggregate's the foundation of our roads. Without a reliable, locally sourced supply, the cost of construction and maintenance increases, delaying essential infrastructure projects, burdening taxpayers, and increasing the carbon footprint of asphalt production. This bill will take important steps to protect access to these critical materials. It strengthens our land use planning by ensuring local governments consider how development impacts aggregate supply. The audit of the aggregate production tax will improve transparency, ensuring that we are spending our funds wisely and reinvested where they're needed on roads, highways, and aggregate site reclamation. Using aggregate resource maps outside the metro will give local governments better data to plan infrastructure projects more effectively. And finally, protecting our local aggregate sources will cut project transportation costs, reduce fuel consumption, and lower carbon emissions, making asphalt production more efficient and environmentally responsible. This bill is truly a balance of infrastructure needs, economic growth, and environmental responsibility, and we urge your support. Thank you very much for your advocacy, Senator Johnson Stewart, and thank you for the time to testify today.
Any question from members? Senator Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is to the author, I believe, or your testifiers can answer it too. I have some real problems with the bill. And to start with, it looks like, starting in Section 3, that you're actually going to try to give the counties authority to stop building on private lands if they require a permit. So you mentioned inside the metro area, but you also in the bill speaks about going outside the 7-county metro area. And so am I reading this right, that let's say I had a piece of land and I want to build on that piece of property, when I go to the county for a permit, would they be able to say you can't have a permit because you have gravel underneath there?
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Senator. Let me think that through. We did work extensively with the Association of Minnesota Counties and the cities throughout the entire state to make sure that this language was amenable to them. Do you have any, you were in on those conversations. Can you give some feedback?
Mr. Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Green. So with regard to Section 3, this section here is just asking the commissioner to consult with the counties, Aggregate and Ready Mix Association, and the Minnesota Asphalt Paving Association, along with other stakeholders, which could include local governments such as League of Minnesota Cities, just to come up with recommendations for statutory changes to the permitting process. And so that would come back to you, and then you could choose to act on those recommendations. But with regard to the specific question, I think the intent there is that local governments be sort of more as thoughtful as possible in those land use decisions. So when they're doing their comprehensive land use plans, that they're just taking into account where development happens.
Yeah, so Senator Herr, if I could add to that.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you. So if you remember, I was up for this bill last week, and we did get some feedback from the counties and some of the cities that they wanted the freedom to make their own decisions, understanding that many counties don't even have their aggregate maps. They don't even know where their aggregate is anyway. So we rewrote this so that, number one, counties and local agencies that don't have access to their maps, they can't even include their aggregate location to begin with, so we didn't impose that on them. And then this language is meant to ask them to consider it, but we were very clear that we did not want to require it. So we just want to raise the awareness, but it's not a requirement. Senator Herr.
Senator Green, any
Mr.
follow-up?
Chair, I've been around long enough to know that when the agencies come in with recommendations to the counties, it's not long before it's a mandate. I don't know if you've got when you've got a bill for mapping, why you would stick any language in that bill that would potentially in the future require permitting. And I appreciate the fact you talk to counties. I like local government, but I like personal property rights better. And so this has the potential, very definite potential, in my opinion, to say to somebody that owns a piece of property, you're not going to build there until we give you permission. We already have enough of those restrictions. The other question would be, you're looking at about $1 million a year for mapping. And that in itself is a problem because I think that, in fact, I know in this year's LCCMR bill, you already have money, and I think you get money in there almost every year. Now, Senator, you may not know that if you haven't been here for a while, but there is money in there, and that mapping money comes in the LCCMR every year. So this year, I think it's $650,000 or something like that. But here, it's $1 million a year. And then the question on that, even though that's too much for me already, on page 3, line 16, it talks about the base amount of this appropriation in fiscal year 2035, and thereafter is zero. So is that base the $950,000 a year for the next 10 years?
Okay, so I
Senator
would like,
Johnson-Stewart.
thank you. So first off, I was talking with Mr. Lee when you mentioned the mapping money that's already allocated through LCCMR. Could you give me a little bit more information on that? Where does that mapping money go?
It goes to the DNR for mapping.
For mapping
excuse me,
what?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Green, go ahead.
Senator Green, if you could specify what it's for mapping of.
For mapping of aggregate services.
I'm not a,
So
Mr.
Chair.
Lee and maybe the DNR can come and clarify that.
and then I promise, Senator Green, we'll get to the other two. As somebody comes up, section 3, lines 2.18, this is for permitting for mining, not permitting for building a house. So this section relates to mining permitting, not construction permitting. And then I know you had one other, the other question. Well, we have our testifier, so I'll answer your third question in a minute, but introduce yourself.
Please state your name for the record.
Hello, my name is Heather Ahrens. I'm the Mineral Potential Manager out of the Division of Lands and Minerals with the DNR. I oversee the mapping program and the aggregate mapping program. And you are correct, we do receive funding about every 3 years from LCCMR. So we've received 2 so far since the 2018 Area Resource Task Force, and we're on our 3rd, but that's not at the same level that was recommended by the task force. So it basically equals about maybe $200,000 per year, and the recommended level to map the state within 10 years is $950,000. And so the goal is to try to get the state done in 10 years, and by doing roughly 6 counties per year.
Sarah Johnson-Stewart.
I'm looking through the amount that we put in, and yes, Senator Green, is for 10 years, came directly out of the legislative auditor's recommendation, and I was trying to find that so that I could provide that information to the senator. So I apologize for here it is. It's the funding that, this is on page 14 of the report, which again, I can make sure that all of our members get, but in Exhibit 2.1, the Office of the Legislature, or I'm sorry, the task force, which was appointed by the OLA, recommended $950,000 a year for 10 years. And by the way, this was in 2018 dollars, so I'm guessing the cost has increased, but this is where we got the numbers from. $950,000 a year for the next 10 years. So yes, Senator Green, that is our proposal. This, of course, is just for this biennium, so the bill that I have is seeking $950,000 this year, next year, for the 80 the 80 counties that are not included in the 7-county metro area. And then the 7-county metro area has been mapped. And so $250,000 in this bill is designated to update that map, given the amount of growth in the 7-county metro area in the last 7 years since this report was first finalized. Senator Herr.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Senator Lee?
Just a comment, Mr. Chair. At the end of the day, I read the bill that says that the nearly $1 million a year will be for the next 10 years. I don't think that is wise to do that. Even the $2 million over the next 2 years, and this is coming out of the general fund, and we don't even have any idea where we're going to be on our targets yet on the general fund. And so I think it would be wise to not move this bill right now. Thank you.
Senator Wiesenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not to belabor what Senator Green said, but I am looking at Section 3. You said it pertained to mining. Is that like, when I read this, it just looks like what he suggested. The local authorities are going to be able to make decisions based in their local areas. There's no statute in here or anything that says anything about mining.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Lee was in on those conversations more than I was, and he mentioned that. I will call him back up here to clarify. So,
Mr. Lee.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Wiesenberg. So, Section 3 here comes right out of the 2018 recommendations from the Aggregate Resource Task Force. And this just asks the commissioner to come up with recommendations to this committee for statutory changes related to the permitting process as it relates to aggregate mining. And that's what Section 3 is. So it's not about building permits on private property. It's about interim use permits for mining operations.
yeah.
Senator Wiesenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then we should clarify that in the bill, I guess, because I'm looking at the other parts of the bill, and it looks like this bill already exists. So this is added language. So if that's what it is, it should say that, right? So, because it doesn't. So if I were to read this bill, if I pulled it up, I wouldn't know. I'm not involved in mining or, aggregate. So if I pull up bill number, 1751, if that's what it gets passed as sometime in the future, unless it would direct me to go there, would it do that? Would there be something saying go to this bill? Because it's not in here, right? Thank you.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Yeah, Senator Wiesenberg, point well taken. We're requesting that this bill gets sent to state and local government. And so I will work with our stakeholders that include the counties and the cities. We got several groups that are working with us to make sure that we get this language correct. And I acknowledge it is vague, and we'll make sure that before we get to state and local government, we have an amendment. But thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Senator Johnson Stewart, closing remark.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. We want to get this right. The most important thing is that we find aggregate, because it is literally a cornerstone, get it, to our construction industry. I, again, just want to emphasize it's especially an issue in rural Minnesota. I want you to know that we currently recycle all of our blacktop and concrete that comes out of our construction sites, so we're already using a lot of recycled aggregates. It's just we can't use that for every application. Also, I wanted to thank my co-authors, Senator Eichhorn, Senator Hauschild, and Senator Herr, and I welcome additional comments as we move this, I hope, onto state and local government.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Senator Hauschild. Would you move the bill? Senator Hauschild moves Senate File 1751 as amended to be recommended and passed to be referred to the State and Local Government Committee. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Motion prevail. Okay, next, we're going to switch the order of agenda a little bit. I'd like to ask Senator Park, she's here already, to have Senator Park come to the testimony table. And Senator Park will be presenting Senate File 1461. Oh, 1464. Senator Park, anytime you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Her and Chair Icorn and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to present SF 1464. I want to first thank you, Chair Her, and Senator Wiesenberg, Senator Kunish, and Senator Barr for being co-authors on this bill. Chair, I do have a DE amendment I'd like to put forward, the A6. And I'm happy to go over the changes in the A6 DE if you'd like.
Sure. Senator McCune? Okay. Senator McCune moved that the A6 amendment be adopted to Senate File 1464. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevail. Okay, Senator Pa, the bill as amended.
Okay, thank you, Chair Her. So the A6 amendment has the same goals as the previous to the original bill. Subdivision 1 and Subdivision 4 moves a task force from under the Department of Natural Resources to the Legislative Coordinating Commission, making this legislative task force a task force that would report back to the legislature on recommendations. Subdivision 2 of the DE still has 17 members of the task force, including 2 House members and 2 Senate members. The changes are who appoints the members on the task force and the number of appointments. Chair, we tried to be very thoughtful about including all the main stakeholders and making sure that we had expert and diverse representation on the task force. And then Subdivision 5 moves up the timeline for the task force to have its work completed by February 26th of 2026 so that the next legislature can consider its recommendations. And then the last change is adding Section 2, which adds a moratorium for the DNR on adopting any rules on foraging until July 1st, 2027. So those are the main changes of the bill. I'd be happy to talk a little bit about the bill, and then I've got 2 testifiers.
Okay. Whoever can go first, do state your name for the record. Welcome.
Yes, hello. My name is Peter Martiniaco, and I am the current president of the Minnesota Mycological Society. Thank you, Chair Her and Senator Pa and committee members for the opportunity to comment on SF 1464, which would establish a Minnesota Sustainable Foraging Task Force to support a science-based approach to foraging policy with a range of voices, including the Minnesota DNR. The Minnesota Mycological Society was founded in 1899, and for 125 years, our mission has been to study and educate the public about fungi, including teaching identification to safely gather mushrooms for food. Equitable opportunities for sourcing nutritious food being one of the core motivations of our founder, Dr. Mary Whetstone, a pioneer in providing health care in Minnesota. The Minnesota Mycological Society and Minnesota Foraging Alliance and all their partners support this legislation in order to better support responsible and sustainable foraging as a recognized means of connecting with our natural resources. The understanding of foraging in Minnesota has generally come from those that have long cultural traditions of foraging. Our indigenous communities easily come to mind, but also many immigrant communities have long traditions of foraging that they seek to share in their new home. The Hmong, Karen, Vietnamese, East and West African communities, as well as immigrants from Eastern Europe, all come from long, passionate cultures of foraging traditions. Foraging is much more part of Minnesotans' lives than we may realize, and I want to thank Senator Hauschild for pointing out some of that. In a survey of northern Wisconsin residents, not Minnesota, but close, 1 in 3 had done foraging activities in the previous 12 months. Thousands of Minnesotans harvest wild rice. Many of us have our first introduction to foraging picking berries, and thousands travel to pick blueberries every year. While not generally pursued on public lands, maple syruping is another foraging activity that has many enthusiasts, and we're in the middle of maple syruping season right now, so people are out there boiling and moving their sap around. The DNR testified in a House hearing that they see no need for this legislation since they are not looking to develop new regulations. However, this is contrary to everything that the DNR has communicated over the last few years. After this testimony, Parks and Trails Director Ann Pierce was referenced in a Star Tribune article that the agency has launched its own internal working group seeking the overhaul of foraging regulations. However, the DNR has been steadfastly unwilling to include foraging stakeholders in discussions regarding this effort. And we have real concerns that access to public state lands are going to be restricted, not based on any science, but that foraging is somehow not compatible with the protection of state land resources. We willingly acknowledge there's been unregulated activities involving group educational events that the DNR and Minnesota Foraging Alliance and all their partners in foraging education agree need permitting and regulation. As an organization, we take pride in the stewardship of our shared lands and that these situations must not be repeated. The DNR expends considerable resources toward outdoor activities like HOV recreation, mountain bike trail development, as well as many other initiatives to get out more, promoting outdoor engagement, improving access. Even when you go do the following search, if you search Explore Minnesota through Google, it highlights a former Explore Minnesota landing page that pictures someone picking and identifying mushrooms. DNR's accommodation and direct promotion of many other outdoor pursuits points to a missed opportunity, as foraging is an immersive activity that directly connects us to the land. It provides for an outdoor pursuit that is accessible without great expense, and additionally can provide equitable access to some of the most nutrient-dense food available. This does not mean less regulation. It means regulations acknowledging and addressing the concerns both in policy for publicly sharing resources and conserving those resources. We just seek to develop thoughtful recommendations for policy and regulation to guide management of this outdoor pursuit as a responsible and sustainable activity. People sometimes ask, what do we understand about the sustainability of foraging? While not a widespread activity in the United States, foraging for personal use has been done sustainably for hundreds of years in all parts of the world. In times past, it has been done without management. However, today's society, we must be more mindful of many factors, but it gives us confidence that bringing together like-minded Minnesotans to advocate for thoughtful policies and regulations, we can promote successful foraging in Minnesota, sustainable foraging in Minnesota. Hunting and fishing share the same passion and bond to the outdoors as foraging does, all which support fostering interest and close connection to the natural gifts that our state has blessed us with. Our goals are to continue to educate more Minnesotans and connect them to the outdoors that we must all respect and conserve. I want to thank the committee for hearing this legislation. As Minnesotans, we can continue to show leadership in recognizing the value of foraging as part of our connections to the outdoors. I'm very happy to answer any questions now or any time in the future.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next is Mr. Sherman.
Hamatakipe, Buju. My name is Sean Sherman. I am the executive director of my nonprofit Natives in Minneapolis, which is North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems, which is what Natives is the acronym for. I'm also the founder of my own company, The Sous Chef, and the restaurant Awamini downtown. I'm happy to be here, so thank you for allowing me to have this testimony, but I just really want to throw my support and my voice in for this Sustainable Foraging Task Force. I think it's really important for us to have a better understanding of this beautiful land space that we are upon, which is Minnesota. We tried really hard with our restaurant to showcase the beauty of the bounty around us that we don't typically see in public spaces, and we're able to really showcase how people can really enjoy some of the natural pieces that are here in Minnesota, whether it's as simple as a cedar maple tea or maybe some fried hopness, which is a beautiful tuber that grows naturally here, amongst all the berries. And I think it's really important for us to understand that sustainability is really important. I think that we have an opportunity here in Minnesota to be thought leaders and to be to find a way that we can really work together to understand how we can utilize our natural spaces. As an Indigenous perspective, for far too long, our Indigenous knowledge has been kind of pushed aside because for countless generations, we lived sustainably with the world around us, having a vast education of the plants around us. Plants are everything to us. They're food, they're medicine, they're crafting, they're lodging, they're tools, they're weapons. That education still exists today, and we can continue to push that. And I think it's important because Indigenous communities really understand the sustainability of how to harvest, how to identify which parts to harvest, when to harvest, and how not to damage. Because human interactions with plants and foraging and harvesting can be really beneficial for the environment and ourselves as human beings too. So it's really important that we put some experts in charge of helping to define rule sets that will allow us to create sustainable ways to allow families and children to grow and to learn this education. I myself grew up foraging, harvesting things like chokecherries, wild onions, and many other things just growing around us naturally. And I think it's really important for our kids these days to be able to have that opportunity to be able to enjoy the land space and to understand how plants work. Because the more plant knowledge we have, the stronger we become, the deeper connected we become with this land space, and the more amazing we see how this particular region of Minnesota is compared to everywhere else. And everywhere is special, but we really do have a beautiful state. We really do have beautiful things. And I think I do agree with some of these lines, especially on the one allowing both some of our Indigenous communities from our two different federally recognized tribes. So having experts from Anishinaabe community and Dakota community to be allowed to be able to voice their own cultural significance when it comes to some of these pieces too. Because we're all different, but we all share a common a love of the world around us, of the plants around us, and I'm just happy to be here to lend my support.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman, do we have two additional testifying? Oh, we have one here. State your name for the record, Ms. Erickson.
Thank you, and I'm really bummed to go after him. Mr. Chair, Senator Pod, members of the committee, my name is Tara Erickson, and I'm a member of the Minnesota Mycological Society, and I've worked in government and public affairs for 25 years. I am volunteering my time to lead the advocacy around this legislation. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. This legislation is a few years in the making. Around this time in 2023, I found out about possible regulations severely limiting foraging activities in state parks by reading a Minnesota Mycological Society newsletter. And I immediately contacted the organization to understand what was happening and if I could be of any assistance. What I found out was that the Minnesota DNR at the time had refused to meet with any stakeholder organizations and these folks were rightly upset and scared about the possibility of not having access to state lands for foraging. I immediately said I would volunteer and see what I could find out. We attempted to request meetings with the DNR to discuss the issues that they might be seeing, if they had data to show large increases in people wanting to forage, but we were unsuccessful until I started working to get media stories around the issue, and we sent a formal letter to the governor's office requesting that they help secure a meeting with the DNR. And I do want to thank the governor's staff because they did help us with a meeting, and we did meet with the DNR in August of 2023. During this meeting, the possibility of new quantity limits were raised, and we heard that the DNR was considering a 1-gallon bag limit from news articles. I asked the DNR staff where that particular limit came from, and we didn't really get much of an answer other than they were trying to figure out something that was reasonable. And I told the DNR that the reason why that limit was troublesome was because many of the mushrooms that we forage for just simply would not fit into a gallon bag. And the response that I received was, really? And this was the reason that the advocacy groups and other stakeholders wanted to be at the table. It was clear that statements being made about foragers taking 20 pounds of mushrooms didn't have a lot of context for us, because honestly, that could be one mushroom. Nobody is opposed to potential new rules or regulations, but we want them to be based on data and science and with people who do it at the table. None of these advocacy groups want to stop the DNR from protecting our natural resources. Again, they just want to make sure that they are there and that the rules are correct. People organize when they feel kind of backed into a corner. Potentially losing access to state lands for activity is what brought us all together. And we just kept hearing conflicting statements from the DNR regarding if they were doing rules or if they weren't. And it was at the House hearing that we were told that they were not actually doing any rules, and that was the first time that we had heard that in the last couple of years. Although at the DNR roundtable about a month and a half ago, we were told that the rules were kind of put on hold because they were not going to be looking at just state parks, that they were going to be looking at all state lands. And so we really believe that this legislation is a really good solution to a problem because we believe it's a problem if people lose access to state lands for foraging. Lastly, I love foraging. I grew up in the Iron Range, and nature has been a huge part of my life ever since I was a little girl. My boys are 11 and 13, and you should see them in the spring. Like they go out and they are trying to challenge each other who's gonna find the first morel mushroom. They love ramps. My kids eat fiddleheads, which is really cool to have little kids wanting to do that. And I just think I call all of these people that I have met since I volunteered doing this, they're nature nerds. They are brilliant. They understand every plant. They know the names of every plant, what's edible, what isn't, what they can use it for. And I think it's really important to have their voices at a table when we're determining rules about access to state lands. So thank you so much for doing this bill, and really thankful for it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Erickson. We also have Assistant Commissioner Bob Meyer. I must say, while the two testifiers was talking, my mouth is watering and thinking about all those wild plants that if you don't forage, you won't know how it tastes. Assistant Commissioner Bob Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for the record. Bob Meyer, Assistant Commissioner, Department of Natural Resources, and thank you for allowing me to be here today to testify. And also thank you to Senator Fahl for working on this important issue. We've been working with her and our staff for quite some time on this issue, providing educational, trying to figure out how can we promote and educate people on the use of foraging on state lands, since all state lands are not created equal. If you look at the Outdoor Recreation Act found in 86A.05, it outlines it defines the uses and purposes of each unit of the Outdoor Recreation Act. For example, the purpose of state parks is primarily to preserve, protect, and interpret the natural, scenic, scientific, and historic features present in these units. They are not designed to accommodate all forms or unlimited volumes of recreational use. State forests, on the other hand, are pretty much unlimited to their types of uses: foraging, gathering, camping, hunting, things like that. Wildlife management areas fall in the middle, and a scientific and natural area, many of those, harvesting or foraging is not allowed. There are a handful of those units that do allow those units or that activity by permit. We can provide more information if people are interested. A little bit of how we got here. And first, I should say there is no current rulemaking activity going on our docket or anywhere in the department on foraging. We want to make sure people can do these activities and do them where they want to do, sustainably, and making sure that we are not loving our assets to death. As we found, kind of ironically, about 5 years ago this month, we were forced inside, and the only outdoor recreation was in our parks and outdoor systems that people found. And people were loving our parks to death. Part of what we found and what drew us to those rule recommendations that we were talking about, or the rule process, was we identified collection of edible fruits or mushrooms that exceed the intent of personal non-commercial use on numerous occasions within our state parks. The intent of the rules that we were trying to develop for state parks was not to prohibit these activities, but make sure they were provided in a sustainable way. People like to go to these state parks every year, or people will go morel mushroom hunting to the same oak trees, the same places that they found them year after year. Many times you can see trails through the parks that are not official trails where foragers are taking every year going through the parks. So literally, we're trying to make sure that these uses are done in a sustainable fashion to protect our lands. So with that, we do appreciate the movement on the amendment. I think this is, in my knowledge, the first time traditional ecological knowledge has been referenced in a bill, so congratulations. That's super exciting to see. We do have a work group within our tribal relations team that is talking about traditional ecological knowledge, not only on foraging, but on all sorts of other activities as well. And working with our tribal nations to strengthen those ideas and understandings is critically important. So I know we have other bills on the record that need to go through, but we do look forward to working with the committee and the authors on trying to come up with a path forward that will not only protect the resources we need to protect, but strengthen and promote and allow these activities in other areas of the state where they are more easily acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. There's a question here. Senator Pai, you want to make a remark, or you want to wait for questions?
Senator Chair Her, if you don't mind, if I can give a little bit more context on the bill before we go to questions, just because I think it might answer some of the questions that may be coming.
Okay. Senator Pai.
Thank you, Chair Her. This bill proposes to establish a sustainable foraging task force. And I just want to make sure that that members understand that we're not proposing any actual foraging changes or laws now. We're just asking for a task force that would dive deep into this work. So what that means is that we have tried to put together a very thoughtful list of experts and stakeholders to come together, review data, review information, have robust discussions, and to give recommendations to the legislature about possible changes that could happen. And then it would be up to us the next year to get those recommendations, review it, have robust discussions, and then possibly do some policy around it. So I just want to make it clear that we're not asking for adoption of any changes to foraging, because I think based on some of the discussions in the House, it was almost perceived like we were making changes. And we're just asking for a task force that's very, very important and essential work. Because as you've heard from some of the testifiers today, foraging holds a very deep significance for Minnesotans. For generations, people have been harvesting, whether it's wild berries, mushrooms, or edible plants, connecting with nature and relying on it for food and medicine. So to protect this tradition, we have to make sure that we have ecological sustainability, but at the same time, find a balance between responsible foraging, conservation, without over restrictions. And we're hoping that through this task force, we'll be able to achieve that goal. And so I want to first just say, extend my thanks to Assistant Commissioner Bob Meyer for his work with me in doing some of the work that went into the A6 amendment, taking some of their recommendations and balancing some of that with the goal of this task force. So I just wanted to kind of clarify a little bit on that before I get a ton of questions.
Okay, I see Senator Weisenberg raise his hand. Senator Weisenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm on this bill because I like foraging and I like eating berries and mushrooms and things. And so I think it's changed a little bit from when I signed on to it. But what I see is I just don't want foraging to be made illegal. And after having more conversations with other foragers and with the DNR, they're not going there from what I hear. And they're obviously on record now saying that. So I think maybe there's a different path we could take than the task force here. And it sounded like Mr. Bob Meyer said there's already a work group, right? Or some kind of native work group that's already talking about these things. If we could dig into what they're doing, then we don't have to have an additional task force, which is going to cost money. And let's get to a place where we can not infringe upon our foraging rights, right? But we're also not make more laws or any legislation, and continue working with DNR and see how we can get there without having to have this task force if there's already someone already doing this. And I mean, we already know some of these things, right? Like the ecological knowledge, we have that, So, then there's something in here on page 2, development recommendations for reduced price foraging permits. I would not advise to have a foraging permit at all. I'm not going to buy one. I'm not saying I'm going to break the law, but I'm going to eat berries if I want to. Let's keep working with the DNR. I don't really like the language how it is right now, but at the same time, we're going to keep foraging, right? So, thank you.
Okay, Senator Pa.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond back to Senator Weisenberg and offer and ask that Assistant Commissioner, if you could come up here and maybe clarify whether or not there's a working group right now that's working on these issues. But to my knowledge, there is none. There is not a working group talking about foraging, and that's exactly why this task force is so essential. It's because we want to establish a task force that would dive deep into foraging and would be able to make recommendations to the legislature to consider.
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess I'll respond. If there isn't, that's fine too. But I still think that might be a way to go and not have to have a task force. If we can get the Mycological Society together with some DNR people and talk, not have to have it as a task force. Let's just keep talking like we're talking right now, and let's move and let's work to make sure we all get what we want. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Green first. Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, I had a problem with your bill from the start. Okay. And one of the problems is every time I see another task force or another growth in agency, it really it concerns me. One of your testifiers testified that there was a fear that in the future there may be more regulations coming, but your testifiers and yourself seem to be saying that you want more regulation. And I think that's a dangerous route to go down, especially with the laws that were passed last year. Because when this reaches its conclusion and you do start permitting, the people that are going to be harmed would be people like myself who also forage. I mean, I like going out and doing that. But if I have to start getting a permit for that, then that's a big hassle I'm not going to do. And the people that would be really taking advantage of that are the people that do the foraging commercially for resale or restaurants. I have nothing against those people. Believe me, if they can make a profit, I'm all for that. But I don't want to make it so that it's hard for the people that just want to do it for their own use. And I think this is going to do that. I've been around long enough to know that that these commissions and these task forces don't really do the job that you think they're going to do. And you're looking at a year for this to happen. I see things coming up that you're not going to be happy with in the end. And I'm wondering if you thought about just doing a more simple solution to what you're worried about, which is to say you can't limit foraging. I mean, our public lands are public lands. And granted, I believe we have way too many of them, but they are there. And if we're going to have them, we shouldn't be limiting people to go on them. And we shouldn't be requiring permits for people to go out and pick blueberries or pick mushrooms or other things that they want to do in the forest. And I think that's where your bill is leading. I do appreciate the one part of it at the end where it says the DNR can't make rules until after this is done. But I think you could eliminate the rest of the bill and say DNR can't make those rules. So I can't support this bill. I was going to come and talk to you, but unfortunately, my days have been pretty full. And so I hope that you'll consider going a different route. So two questions that I have for you, and because we're running out of time, I'm going to ask them both, and then I will not say any more after that, Mr. Chair. First of all, where did the idea for the bill, was there a specific incident that happened that brought up the idea for this bill? And is this task force going to be an all-volunteer task force, or is there going to be a fiscal note, granted maybe small, but somewhere down the line?
Senator Pa, and I think the answer probably already presented earlier, but perhaps we can repeat it again. Senator Pa.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Herr, and thank you, Senator Green. I too am someone who absolutely loves foraging. And up until 2 years ago, I was actually unaware of some of the rules around foraging that I never knew existed. And I think it's because it's not always readily available for people to know what all the rules are. But there are definitely limitations in our current rules right now that limit people from foraging. And I too love foraging. So the intent of this bill really is to hopefully explore sustainable foraging and allow it, but with more, I would say, recommendations that come from people who are basing this on science, some research or data that we may have, and also people who have always had the knowledge of traditional foraging to come together and really give us those recommendations. Because I'll let Tara talk a little bit more about how this started, to your question about what spurred this. But the concern has been that there were some rulemaking that was considered by the Department of Natural Resources that would limit foraging, and the public was not getting the input or the opportunity to even be listened to before rulemaking was happening. And so that to my understanding has since been paused, but in the future, our own department could be making rules that would limit foraging, and there would be no voices to that from the public. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm just going to have Tara kind of talk just quickly about how this spurred, because the bill did come from the communities that forage, that are concerned about our foraging laws and rules.
Ms. Harrison, do you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Green. She's exactly correct. We were very worried. So the Minnesota Mycological Society and about 3 other organizations, we had been trying to meet with the DNR. And again, we were able to have one meeting almost 2 years ago. And they said, when the rules come out, you can look at the rules and make comments on them, and that's it. And we just wanted to be at the table because we felt like the people making the rules didn't necessarily understand foraging or the plants or the mushrooms that that we're going out for. So the whole point of the task force is to ensure that those people are at the table when this is being done. And I know you don't like task forces.
Senator Kunish.
Thank you. I was actually going to say just that. It's really important that the DNR and that we all hear the voice of the people that are actually doing the work of foraging and learning from that, the voices of these people. If those folks that are making decisions don't realize that a mushroom won't fit into a gallon bag, then how can we really expect them to make really good laws or rules or those sort of things? I think it's really important that we listen to the recommendations that come out of this task force and use those to create, whether it's a paid permit or what kind of limitations or areas that are, that should not be foraged in and areas that should be. And so I think it is important that we have this task force and we have this conversation. And I just want to remind Senator Green, as a registered tribal member, you have indigenous rights to forage across this state. You retain treaty guaranteed rights to hunt, fish, and gather resources, including our wild rice on land ceded in treaties. And I think it's important to also learn from all of this in an indigenous way, in a cultural way. I mean, I remember the little lady down at the end of my block, Grandma Pikus, was a Polish immigrant right after World War II. And she would go in the woods and forage. And as kids, we would follow her and she would teach us, don't eat this mushroom, eat this mushroom, take this home. That's how we learned that you can eat fiddleheads. And, who ate fiddleheads back in the 60s, So I think this is an important task force. I think it's a really unique task force, and I think it's really an opportunity to hear from a diverse number of groups within our community who forage for whatever reason. And thank you for bringing this forward and allowing me to be part of it.
Thank you. Well, Senator McCune.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill and the coalition that has come together around this. I think this is a wonderful idea, and I especially just wanted to say how much I think the formation of this group to work on this, from what I'm seeing, I like the inclusivity of the group. Like, it looks like it's a really nice, you're being really thoughtful about who should be at this table. Whereas right now from what I can understand, there's the people who are at the table to make whatever decision should be made about the rules are not there, and instead are just responding to agency rules. So it's absolutely appropriate that we should be bringing people in to make recommendations around this, people who really know what they're talking about, and with those diverse perspectives. I like the transparency also that this brings to the process, to really, when we're talking about rulemaking and then making recommendations about how that should go, to really have people involved in these activities from the public, coming together through meetings and then making recommendations. There's just a lot of transparency there that I think is much better than the DNR in a closed environment, just making their own decisions with their staff. So I thank you all for your work. Support it wholeheartedly. I think it's great.
Thank you, Senator McCune, and thank you, Senator Pop, for bringing this legislation forward. Other than the point on legislation that brought by our members here, I would say we're pretty much give you ideas or input as a member of the workforce. The idea itself, even from Senator Green, Senator Kunish, and Senator Wiesenberg and all. I just want to make a little comment, and I applaud you for bringing this legislation forward, because you are methodical, in planning and take the right step one at a time. And I recall when I first got to the Senate here, they print my Senate card. And I know people in our community love foraging, and they're a little nervous going out there because it's new territory for them. And I would say that I would say, be confident when you go out there, as long as you don't trespass or as long as you don't do anything you felt illegal, and I may have intruded into this meter, but I'm proud of that because I hand them my business card, said to elderly Hmong women, said, take my business card and go out there and forage. And if you get into a problem, have the conservation or any law enforcement call me. I'll deal with your issue. And I have never heard any issue back. So it gives them confident. But thank you for taking the step forward and find a path there to make sure that it's sustainable and safe and having a good diet and exchange of culture as well. Any last remark before we pass your bill?
Thank you, Chair Her. And I just wanted to address Senator Wiesenberg and Senator Green, who both love foraging as much as me, Senator Her, you, and Senator Kunesh does. This bill really is a bill that would give us legislators the tool to make good recommendations for policy going forward when it comes to foraging, instead of leaving it to the department to make it through rulemaking and without necessarily some of the recommendations from the communities, from all the experts and diverse stakeholders. So again, if this goes through, which I really hope that you all will support, you'll be looking at the recommendations coming from this group next year. And then you can decide where do we want to see policy for foraging into the future. Because for hundreds of years, Minnesotans in our indigenous communities have been foraging. And today, that is what we're talking about, is that could be very much restricted and prohibited. And I don't want to see that happen, because when I go forage with my family, and my son finds the first mushroom, kind of like what you're saying, he gets just excited about it as when we catch our first fish during fishing opener. I mean, seriously, foraging is a way of life for Minnesotans. We love the outdoors, and I don't want to see that stopped. And so, but at the same time, I don't want to be the one making the decision because I'm not an expert. I would love to hear from the experts who do this work, the scientists, and also the DNR staff, and also our public and our indigenous communities and all the stakeholders come together and then give us those recommendations to consider. So thank you again, Chair Her, and thank you for the members for this time.
Thank you, Senator Pai. And Senator Wiesenberg, would you move this legislation?
So moved.
Okay, Senator Wiesenberg moved that Senate File 1464 as amended be recommended to pass and be referred to State and Local Government Committee. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Oh.
Thank you.
Hold on. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion prevail. Okay, thank you very much. We will not have time for Senator Hauschild short land bill, but we'll schedule that for the next committee meeting. So meeting is adjourned. You good? Anything else? Oh, you ready? Okay, I have not adjourned yet. Are they here? They're here? Okay. All right. We have not adjourned. We have not adjourned. No, we have not adjourned yet. Okay. I was not well informed that our testifiers are here. And this is...
You too. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Hauschild, let's hear it. This is probably the shortest land bill of all time. I don't know what the reason why it was the shortest. Usually land bill are like 100-page thick. So on to your bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. For you today, I have Senate File 1635. I do have an A1 amendment.
Okay, A1 amendment is in your folder. Okay. All in favor of Hauschild's amendment A1? adopted to the Senate File 1635, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion prevail. Senator Hauschild, the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you stated, this is the DNR's lands bill, so I think it would be most pertinent for me to just pass it to Lori Klein. But really quickly, before I do that, I just want to recognize that there is a family members here who donated some of the land for the Carley State Park piece of this bill, and I just appreciate them making the trip and being here today. And with that, I will pass it to the DNR. Thank you so much.
Okay, please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. My name is Lori Klein, attorney for the DNR Division of Lands and Minerals. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony about the 2025 Lands Bill today. Each year, the Lands Bill, the DNR proposes a Lands Bill, and the bill may include amendments to statutes affecting DNR-administered state land, changes to state park or forest boundaries, or authorization to sell certain lands. This year, the Lands Bill is short. It has 4 sections as amended. One is a proposed state boundary change, and the other 3 are tax forfeited land sales proposed by counties. Section 1 is DNR's proposal to add approximately 58 acres to Carley State Park to facilitate a possible future acquisition of the land. Under Minnesota Statute 85.012, the commissioner is authorized to acquire lands for park purposes if those lands are within the state park boundaries. The landowner has expressed a desire to include the donation of this property in their will, and they are here in the audience today. This particular land is partially forested and includes the north branch of the Whitewater River and also contains restored prairie sections. Integrating this parcel into the park would enhance recreational opportunities for visitors and bolster riparian corridor protection and access. Sections 2 and 3 of the bill authorize Aiken County to sell 2 parcels of tax forfeited land by private sale, and Section 4 authorizes St. Louis County to sell 2 parcels of tax forfeited land by private sale. DNR has reviewed Sections 2, 3, and 4 that were proposed by the counties, and DNR does not have any concern about them. That concludes my comments. Thank you for your time today. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any question from members? Okay, Senator Hauschild, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate, once again, bringing the lands bill. I think this is my 3rd lands bill, and I appreciate you all passing it. Like I said, nothing in here is controversial. There are a couple of additional parcels we added in the amendment from Senator Farnsworth and my district. And with that, Mr. Chair, I don't think I have anything else to add.
Okay. Senator Hauschild, does the family want to say a few words, or they want to remain anonymous?
Would you like to say anything on the record?
And welcome, and state your name for the record.
My name is Mike Morath, landowner, wanting to do the best with the land we have in the future. I hear there's lots of foragers in here. And if you accept this donation, it will provide many more acres for you to wander around on. I do not like mushrooms, and if I see a morel, I step on it. So with that said, it's beautiful land. If anybody's been to Carley Park before, the bluebells are phenomenal, and this is just an extension of the wildflowers that go from the state park downstream. The other thing I'd say is this is a way to develop a wildlife corridor that may one day connect Carley Park to the Whitewater, providing the proper environment for what we're trying to protect here. So with that, I'll let my wife say something.
Welcome. And do state your name for the record.
My name is Jeanette Morath, and I'm one of the landowners of the subject property. And he does not really step on morels. I happen to love mushrooms. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify something too, that Our property consists of approximately 58 acres, and they are, as my husband has described, this includes our residents. So the residents would not be part of this donation. It's my understanding that the boundary had to be set first so the DNR can receive this property per our estate plan. So that's why we went this route first, because we can't finish our estate plan till we knew that the DNR would indeed be interested in it. So that is why we're here. It's a way of giving back that is very interesting for us. Life has been good, and it's, as I say, a way to give back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any question from members? Well, thank you. It's the McGrath, right?
Close enough.
Okay. Mike and Mara, thank you for your kindness, and kindness will not go unnoticed, even effective force. To my faux pas, I almost gavel and adjourn this meeting, but the good force still allow us to give time for us to hear the bill and hear you in itself. So, this bill, as amended, will lay over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. So thank you very much, Senator Hauschild. Thank you. Okay, so it's the end of business today, and thank you for your patience. A little small scrimmage at the end, but we touched down. So that goal and meeting's adjourned.